Tiger, are you still here? While I take a drink after shooting my mouth off for how long have we been live? 2 hours. Almost 2 hours. Let the moon fall. Alright, here we go. Alright, so the other deck that we have fully that is unique that I have created was something that Laggy also redeemed channel points for and gave the deck to Tiger. So I asked Tiger what deck he wanted. And he comes back with, I want a deck that's of a goblin that has partner and a female goblin that has partner and and can partner with a rabbit or a cat or I forget what all you said. Rabbit and cat, I remember. Shoot, I don't remember what the other, because you gave me four things. Um, Rabbit, cat, and dragon. Okay, dragon. Gotcha. Maybe it was only three. Um, and mask. Okay. So, and then he told me, I'm like, whoa, that's very specific. And then he told me what it was for. And, uh, so this deck is, or the request was for a character from our Pathfinder game, who is one of Tiger's NPCs that he voices and plays, and has created. And she is a goblin child, whose name is Nugget. And she is, class-wise in Pathfinder, a Vigilante. Which, how the Vigilante class works is you have your normal persona or self, and then your alter ego. And so, us as players didn't realize that the alter ego and the normal self were the same person for probably safe to say years. And wasn't really revealed until I think the beginning of this year. Anyway, so her normal self, or I don't know how you want to phrase that. Yep, little years. Was she's just basically a crazy wild child goblin kid, which is normal for goblins. They age quickly. They have the the I almost want to say one track mind, but it's chaotic mind, I guess, is really what I want to go to. Love of shinies, love of battle, and the cat orientation was because Nugget carries around this black and white cat that she calls Corn Dog, through the majority, well, not the majority, but part of our storyline with her and experience with her. And so this deck was supposed to be Nugget centered. Her other persona is the doll, which is she kind of portrayed as having like a cloak, and then she also wears a mask. Very almost like, I want to say very, at least, I mean, if I had a picture, I would pull it up. But speech pattern is completely different. It was a very cryptic character. We didn't really know much. They didn't speak much. They traveled with a shape-shifting creature called the Rider, that for the majority of our time experience was in the form of a unicorned rabbit, hence where the rabbit came from. But yeah, it was a very odd character, very interesting, very left center, very like would show up at the most random times in our playthrough, usually helping us out in some way, shape, or form. Um, but yeah, so that was we find out that she is a follower, a an agent of Grotus, which is a deity in Pathfinder who is the moon. It is a living moon that hangs above um, the land of Pharasma, which is the goddess of death and fate and birth. And it's said in the lore of Pathfinder that whenever Grotus makes the complete movement to hitting ground level, where he actually meets the ground, then the world ends. Ragnarok occurs, for lack of a better term. Um, so we were looking through the options, and we could have gone several different ways. It really got down to taking Vile Smasher as our stand-in for Nugget, because we did find that I knew it was a goblin, but I didn't know whether it was female. She is female. It's actually Ankle Shanker and Vile Smasher are the same individual, but they come from the plane of Tarkir. And so when we did that set, we had one timeline, then went back in that timeline and followed a different timeline. So you had um, Khans of Tarkir and then Dragons of Tarkir, which were two different timelines. And I believe it's in Dragons that she's Vile Smasher, and Ankle Shanker is her Khans version. So we ran with, obviously, I did this breakdown a little bit differently, so pardon me. I guess it'd probably be easier if I just pulled it up for here. So, Vile Smasher the Fierce. So she's a 3-drop Goblin Berserker for 2/3. She's a 2/3. And whenever you cast your first spell each turn, choose an opponent at random. Vile Smasher the Fierce deals damage equal to that spell's converted mana cost to that player or a planeswalker that player controls. And then she also has partner. Because I knew the card had partner, and I knew it was a goblin. We found out she was female. I'm like, okay, awesome. Cool. We're going with this one. So we have red and black. And then I found a cat. There's actually 2 cats. One was more of a humanoid, but Falthus was the closest that I could come to with a cat, because it also has partner, and says commanders you control have menace and death touch, and it's a 2/2 for 3. In analyzing how that works, Vile Smasher really isn't an attacker at all. Falthus really isn't an attacker. Um, I mean, you can attack in, have death touch, and replay the commander anyway, but Vile Smasher is going to lend itself more towards sitting on the battlefield and you taking advantage of her ability through the spells that you're casting. So I didn't really like it. Also solidified us into red-black. We didn't have a third color at all. So it was possible we could do it. The issue with that, if I was going to run Falthus, I would want Vile Smasher to have the ability to target any creature as well. Because then no matter the damage that she's doing, she's killing whatever it is. Because if she has Death Touch, then any damage that she does, even outside of combat damage, is death to whatever creature it is, unless it has Indestructible. But we don't have that. So I kind of explored a little bit more, and actually Tiger found Brinolin, the Moon Kraken. And because Grotus is literally a moon, we're like, that's pretty on theme. Pretty cool. I didn't even think about it. Brynolin is a fairly new card. It actually just came out in last year, looks like. I think it was in the Commander product from last year. So it's we ended up going with this as our other partnered commander. So we're running Black Riot blue. So 6 and 2 blue for a 6/8 Kraken. And when it enters the battlefield, or whenever you cast a spell with converted mana cost 6 or greater, you may return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. Which, in also theme with Pathfinder or lore with Pathfinder, it's stated that anybody who has like an interaction with Grotus himself or has a conversation very much loses sanity. Confusion sets in. His own, from my understanding, his own like followers are usually on the left of center side of crazy. Not all of them, but I'm just saying that is kind of the theme around him. So we went with that, and while I was building this deck, I'm pulling in because I'm like, well, we're gonna have Vile Smasher on the field earlier than we're gonna have Brynolin because he's the big boy, the big Kraken. And while I'm building the deck, and the way that I do it is I culminate cards and then start weeding. But as I'm doing it, I'm like, okay, Vile Smasher. We're gonna get the spells that are dealing the damage. Basically, our end game, our fun, our game plan is to do damage through the spells, and then have Vile Smasher also do damage based on the CMC of the card. And so I'm pulling all these red spells because red is very much, direct damage to face. Now we're obviously randomizing this because she's a goblin. It's gonna be random. That's also, in theme for goblins in general. It's also in theme with Magic the Gathering. A lot of the goblin stuffs that they do usually has a random or a coin flip or a dice roll of some sort. And I'm looking at these, and I'm like, these are all kinds of X spells. And I'm looking at blue, and I'm like, because I'm thinking, okay, we have these damage spells, which is one suite, basically in red. And then if we're looking at blue, blue has a lot of recursion of spells. I can grab these spells back from the graveyard, play them again for the same value that I played them again. Granted, it would have to be the first spell, but still, that's more damage. Whether we get it off of Vile Smasher or not, we're still doing more damage. We're bringing these spells back. But the issue with that is a lot of the blue recursion spells state that the spell is cast automatically. And a lot of the red spells that do damage have an X in their mana cost, which means you're denoting what those spells are doing in the realm of their damage by paying some sort of amount of mana with that X. The problem with that is if the blue spell casts the card again from the graveyard and just casts it, you have no way to denote what that X is. It is 0. There is nothing. You do not have the chance to infuse any mana into it. So, that completely defeats the purpose of running spells that do damage. So I'm like, okay, we're removing all of those X spells for the vast majority. and we're putting in stuff that does a finite amount of damage, but we can redo it multiple times. So that completely changed the sorcery and instant rundown of this. And we have spells that are either big butt kicking spells, or it does a decent amount of damage. 5 mana for 5 damage to target player or planeswalker. Awesome. Great. Let's do it. So, that was kind of what I wanted to explain on this one. But that's kind of the theme of the deck. Is we're doing damage randomly, sometimes targeted, but we're continually doing that. We are the goblin throwing vials of what does it say? Dragonfire. Vials of dragonfire at whatever and whomever we can. That is the game plan. And when we get Brinolin on the field, I specifically made the cards, as much as I could, 6 or greater. Even some of the damage spells are 6 or greater. So let's dig into it. Now that we've established the commanders. So any spell, any card that you see here that is outlined in red is something that is going to trigger Brinolin if he is on the field. So that is something that we are bouncing off of the field back to our opponent's hands, either removing a large threat or something that is probably triggering their combo or their advantage on the board. Because the beauty of bounce is it's not destruction and it's not exile. If it, is usually there's not anything that prevents exile. But because, if it's an indestructible permanent, you can still bounce it as long as it's, targetable. As long as it doesn't have hexproof or shroud, it go bye-bye. It doesn't matter. Or if you're bouncing something that, is lording, which is, I realize, a magic keyword. So lord is something that boosts your field in some way, shape, or form. Usually it's just +1/+1, usually tied to a creature type specifically. But something like her name went out of my brain, and I literally played the card or saw the card played. Thank you. Elish Norn is a beefier lord. She +2/+2s your entire board and -2/-2s everybody else's. So if you can bounce Elish Norn off the field, you make your crap bigger and you shrink their stuff. Basically returning the board to normal state, but it definitely, removes their advantage. So I'm just saying, that was, a rabbit that for whatever reason we decided to run and chase there. But any outline card here is going to trigger Brinolin to where you can bounce it. So we have Arcane Signet. This is just this is the mana suite. These are the cards we have in here to get us back. Excuse me. To get us up to that high level of mana to where we can funnel the mana into spells and start bouncing crap or start playing damage cards repeatedly or, what have you. So Arcane Signet, 2-drop. Tap it, add 1 mana of any color from your commander's color identity. Which, even though there are 2, it doesn't matter. They are your commanders. So this taps for any of the 3 colors that we need it to. Chromatic Orrery, 7-drop. Says, you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color. This is basically a Chromatic Lantern, but it taps for 5 colorless, which is any color that you want it to be, and because it's on the battlefield. And for 5 and tapping it, you draw a card for each color among permanents you control. Technically, that's 5 tapping for drawing 3, but hey, it's card draw. Nothing to sniff at. Commander Sphere, 3-drop artifact that taps for any 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. And if you're in late game, don't need the mana, need the card draw, you can sack it, draw a card. We have all 3 of the signets. So these are, I mean, you can see what they are. But if you have any colorless mana, if you're, at the point of the game to where you're down here where you've got colorless mana out the butt and you don't have Chromatic Ori on the field, you can filter that colorless mana into colored mana with these. Normally, I don't do signets. But of the mana rocks, I don't normally do mana rocks in general very often that are colored. I mean, I usually run, obviously, the colored ones, or colorless ones. But I thought in this deck, we probably want to at least have the ability to get that color as quickly as possible. Because these are 2-drops, and you're only filtering 1 mana into this 4/2. So these pay off for themselves in the long run. Soul Ring is Soul Ring, 1-drop for 2 colorless mana. Thought Vessel, you have at least a little bit of a card draw suite in here. So, blue is good about that. So we have, this is one of our triggers to allow you to have no maximum hand size, and then also taps for a mana. Thran Dynamo, it's a 4-drop artifact, but taps for 3 colorless. Temple of the False God, you can add 2 colorless if you have 5 or more lands when you play this land. Always a good, honestly, include in any commander deck. Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth. So, if anybody noticed, this has black, the least of the colors. But I still included the Urborg because of a few different cards that are in the deck. So when we get to those, I'll point them out. But this basically makes all lands on your field or anybody else's swamps in addition to their other types. Primal Amulet is a 4-drop that says instants and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less. We have 12 instants and 12 sorceries, 24 cards. That's literally almost a fourth of the deck. We're making a fourth of the deck cheaper just by having this on the field. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, put a charge counter on it. Then if there are 4 or more charge counters, you may remove those counters and transform it. Let me actually pull up the other side of it here just so that you can see it. Where is it? I forgot what I was even looking for. Primal Amulet. Here we go. Okay, so it turns into a land on the other side. And when you tap it, add 1 mana of any color. And when the mana is spent on an instant or sorcery spell, you can copy that spell. And you can choose new targets for the copy. So this is another reason why we're using stuff that has a definable amount of damage. Because if we're copying the spell, I guess I can't really say that. I don't think... I guess we're copying the spell. So yes, technically it would work either way for the copy side of things. It's only the returning from the graveyard to where it would actually make a difference. But either way, you're still copying it. So you could literally, you're just doubling the damage either to the same target or to, you're throwing it into different targets. Solemn Simulacrum, Sad Robot, always a great card to have. 4-drop for a 2/2 body that hits the field. When it enters, you get a land card, basic land card on the battlefield, and then when it dies, you can draw a card. Oblivion Sewer. is a 5/8 for 6 Eldrazi, which when you cast it, target opponent exiles the top 4 cards of his or her library, and you may put any number of land cards that player owns from exile onto the battlefield under your control. So it's honestly more there for the small mill, but if you get a land out of it or 2 lands out of it, all the more better. I mean, it's a 5/8, so it's a good body to have on the field as well. If they, for whatever reason, have lands exiled as well, this just says player owns from exile. So you also get access to those as well, if it's not even the 4 that you milled basically for them here. I guess technically they are exiled permanently. They are not actually officially milled because they don't go to the graveyard. But yeah, you free exile of those cards. They don't even go into the graveyard. Even better. Cryptcast, 4-drop for a 2/2 with Extort, which is basically whenever you cast a spell, you can pay white or black, which you would be paying black in this deck. If you do, each opponent loses a life and you gain that much life. Not a bad trigger. Extort, honestly, is a pretty cool mechanic. One of the cards as to why we have an Urborg, because you can now do that with any of your lands because you have an Urborg, because all of your lands, if Urborg is on the battlefield, are swamps. And then whenever you tap a swamp for mana, add 1 black to your mana pool. Again, if Urborg is on the field and you tap an island, it taps 4 blue and black, or black and black. Mana. All right. Goblin Electromancer. Another goblin. He's a wizard. Blue-red for a 2/2 goblin wizard. Instants and sorcery spells you cast cost 1 less. Again, we're making a fourth of our deck cheaper, as well as we have a body in case we need something to block with. And then As Foretold, which is one of those just ramp up / bonker cards. 3-drop for an enchantment that says at the beginning of your upkeep, put a time counter on it. Once each turn, you can pay 0 rather than pay the mana cost for a spell you cast with convert a mana cost X or less, where X is the number of time counters on As Foretold. So every one of your upkeeps, you're increasing the counter on this card, basically making 1 card in your hand for that amount or less CMC free each turn. Great card. All right. So some of those could probably have been considered card advantage, but this is our card draw, card advantage section. So we have a dig through time. 6 and 2 blue, but it has delve. So if we're towards, middle end of the game, we can exile cards from our graveyard, and that gives us 1 colorless mana. So if we don't need them anymore, if we can't recur them anymore, basically, creatures, we're not recurring creatures, we're not recurring enchantments, we're not recurring artifacts, we're leaving the instants and sorceries in the graveyard. But basically anything that we can remove basically helps us pay for this card. And you can look at the top 7 cards of your library, put 2 of them in your hand, and then the rest on the bottom of any order. So you get 2 free cards, you get 7 cards that you're looking at. Honestly, it's a great card. It's also instant speed. I love instant speed cards. It's finding out that some cards are sorcery speed, especially combat tricks. I hate combat trick sorcery speed cards. They're an abomination. Anyway. But great. Like, you can literally do this on somebody else's turn just to throw cards into your hand. Itali, Primal Storm, one of the Elder Dinosaurs, which honestly all of them are pretty dope. 4 and 2 red for a 6/6 Elder Dinosaur. Whenever it attacks, Exile the top card of each player's library. Then you may cast any number of non-land cards exiled this way without paying their mana cost. What makes them a bind? um, so when I say combat trick, usually a combat trick is denoting that you are paying mana for a spell that targets either one or multiple of your cards and giving them some sort of bonus. Giving them, +1/+1 counters, or +3/+3 in general, not encounters sometimes. Or reach, or death touch, or stating that a creature has to block this creature this turn during the attack step. If it's a combat trick and you don't want your opponent knowing that you have this in your hand, it needs to be an instant spell. But telling your opponent what you're about. I mean, that's fair. If you want to, balls to the wall. So basically, with that, sorcery speed combat tricks have to be cast before the attack step even starts. So your opponent already knows what's coming at them. They can then play around that, expect what's coming. I'm just not a big fan. Like, unless it's lifelink or, menace or, possibly death touch. It vigilance would be nice. Honestly, I wouldn't. I could mess around with some vigilance. It just, I'm not a big fan. Stunton. I will say that Atali also boosts your Oblivion Sewer option. Because it's exiling cards from your opponent's graveyard. If they're exiling lands, you can then grab more lands from that person with Oblivion Sewer if you end up playing it later. Boo those cards. Okay, so when that dino attacks, you basically just play the top card of yours and an opponent's library for V or exile it. So when this attacks, on the attack trigger, so before even mana happens, each player, so yes, your opponents and you, flip the top card of your library. They are then exiled at that point. And you, the owner of Atali, can now, as long as it's on the field. Glenn, is it as long as it's on the field, or is it just you have free reign of that ability since they've been exiled with Atali? Anyway, they get shunted over to a specific exiled zone or area, and Tiger, you can cast those cards for the entire game. They have been exiled, and it states that you can cast any number of those cards exiled this way without paying their mana costs. So I guess technically you can cast any of those. Hold on. Actually, I'm not sure. Because in my brain, that would, like I say, would just make an entirely different exile zone purely for Itali's cards. And then you could play them without paying their mana cost at any time. Okay, so no, I am wrong. So you have to play them on the attack trigger. So either the spells resolve before blockers are declared. Okay. But they remain in exile. Um, so whether you cast them during that attack trigger or not, they are still exiled cards. You won't have access to them anymore, but they end up going to the normal exile zone rather than the specific Itali exile zone. While I'm not sure what the gender is of Itali, while they are attacking. So if I exile a creature card, I can cast multiple copies of that card as long as it's exiled, or just the one card that is exiled. You get that card, you can play it onto your battlefield in whatever, battlefield. So I usually separate my creatures from the rest of my stuff. But yes, you just get that card specifically under your control. So honestly, Atali is a great card. And that parallels, yes, synergy is neat. So this specifically says non-land cards, which means you can't play the lands because at least for this, means it says you have to pay mana cost. You don't have to pay mana cost for lands. So Atali is exiling that top card of everybody's library, and if you don't play them at that time, then they go into exile. So if each time you're attacking with Atali, somebody's flipping a land or multiple lands, you can see that because their exile pile is public knowledge to everybody playing. So if you're playing Atali, if you're attacking with Atali for a couple turns, you may, flip two or so lands off of somebody's deck, and they are now exiled. Well, Oblivion Sewer, when it comes in, you can target that person, exile 4 more cards off the top of their library, and then you're getting those two, 1 or 2 lands that you already know that are there in their exile zone, as well as any that you just grabbed from the 4 that you just exiled. So it's just more ramp, I guess. More possible ramp. Um, which honestly is something that I didn't even think about until right now. So, so yeah, it's pretty cool. I completely forgotten that was that Atali specifically exiles those cards. All right, but yeah, big Spinosaurus, I believe, is what Atali is with the spinal crest there. All right, so interpret the signs, which is a 6-drop sorcery. Scry 3, then reveal the top card of your library. Draw cards equal to that card's converted mana cost. All right, so scrying means that you are looking at the cards on the top of your library, and then you can either leave them on top or put them on the bottom of your library in any order if you're doing multiple cards. So if you scry 3, hate all of those, or they're all lands for this spell at least, you can throw them to the bottom of the library and then, roll the dice, see what the next card is. Because you've got some hefty spells in this deck. I forgot to outline this card. Because it definitely is a 6-drop. Um, and then But if you look at one and have something, that's a 7-drop or a 6-drop, and put it back onto the top of the deck, you pull that card, reveal it, and then draw cards equal to, I think it includes that card. So you draw cards equal to that CMC for the card. So that's, 6 cards in your hand, which is another reason why I have a few of these to where you have no maximum hand size. Because there are a few blue cards that you're going to be drawing, and it's going to be giving you a lot of cards. So great card advantage, card draw on that one. Because you can view before you reveal, and then you draw. So Mask of Riddles. This is one of your 2 mask options, Tiger. So Mask of Riddles is a blue-black equipment artifact that I assume the face is up here. I never really have clarified like where the damn eye holes are on this thing. It's almost like it's a mask for a Sphinx with how big it is. I don't know. But I always thought it was an interesting design. But the equipped creature has fear. And fear we actually dealt with in Laggy's deck earlier. So the creature cannot be blocked by Robot Butterfly. I mean, yeah, fair. Creature cannot be blocked by any creature except for black or artifact creatures. So they can only be blocked by black or artifact creatures. And whenever equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you can draw a card. So because it has fear, the likelihood of its being blocked is lower, especially if you're attacking somebody who literally doesn't have black in their deck. And artifact creatures, I mean, unless you're up against some sort of gray deck or brown deck, are fairly few and far between. But yeah, so there's one of your mask options. And then Mind's Dilation, which is a 7-drop enchantment that says whenever an opponent casts his or her first spell each turn, that player exiles the top card of his or her library. If it's a non-land card, you may cast it without paying its mana cost. And this is another thing that you can pull off Oblivion Sewer shenanigans with. Because if you're exiling lands off the top of their deck, more lands for you! Recurring Insight is a sorcery for 6. Draw cards equal to the number of cards in target opponent's hand. So if somebody's holding on to a grip of 5 to 7 cards, Yahtzee, you just got a full another grip of cards. And it also has Rebound. If you cast this card from your hand, you exile it as it resolves, and then at the beginning of your next upkeep, you can play it again. And then you exile it. Oh. And Rebound is you play it again without having to pay its mana cost. So you get it twice for 6 mana. Even better than I thought it was. Success. Sunbird's Invocation. Honestly, have always wanted to make a deck that has this card in it. I just like the art in this card. 6-drop enchantment. It says whenever you cast a spell from your hand, reveal the top X cards of your library, where X is the spell's converted mana cost. You may cast a card revealed this way with CMC X or less without paying its mana cost. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. So basically, you get a free spell that you do not have to pay mana for, and the only restriction is... And that's literally every time you cast a spell from your hand. So if you're casting, Amanatu's Augury, that's 8-drop. You can look at the top 8 cards and play a card that's 8 CMC or less for free. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Great card. Staff of Nin, 6-drop. At the beginning of your upkeep, draw a card, and then tap. Staff of Nin deals 1 damage to any target. I usually don't run this card, but card draw is nice. Being able to do an extra damage to anybody is nice. This is basically an equivalent to Phyrexian Arena, to where each upkeep you're drawing an extra turn or an extra card, which is what this does. But that one does damage to you each turn. It's also a little bit... Is it cheap? It is. Yes, it's 3. It's only 3-drop for that one. So half the cost, but you have to take a damage each turn that you get an extra card. This one does damage to other things, so you have to pay the extra mana to do damage to other things rather than yourself. Amanatu's Augury came from actually a Commander product. This came from the same set that the lands deck that I have came from. 8-drop sorcery that says exile the top 8 cards of your library. You may put a land card from among them onto the battlefield. Until end of turn, for each non-land card type, you may cast a card of that type from among the exiled cards without paying its mana cost. So, in this deck, that's going to be... I mean, you have one of any kind. So, creature, artifact, enchantment, sorcery, instant. I think that's it. Doubting myself now. Creature, instant, sorcery, artifact, enchantment. Planeswalker, technically, but you don't have any Planeswalkers in this deck. Sorry. But you get to play those for free. So that's up to 5 cards that you could theoretically, of those 8, well, 6 technically, if one of them's a land, that you can play for free with that sorcery spell. And denote that all of these that have the red outline, if you have Brynolin on the field, you're bouncing a permanent each time you're playing these. Garuda, Doom of the Depths, which is another Kraken, is a demon Kraken for 4 and blue or black, 2 blue or black. We are not running the companion clause, so just forget that. But it's a 6/6, and when it enters the battlefield, each player reveals the top 4 cards of their library, puts them into their graveyard. Put a creature card with an even converted mana cost from among those cards onto the battlefield under your control. So each player. So you're milling 4 cards of every player, including yourself, and then you get to target any creature that has an even converted mana cost from among them and get to play it for free. It's an interesting little card. I mean, a 6/6 Demon Kraken, I thought was probably, well, these aren't exiled. These actually get milled. They actually get thrown into the graveyard. But yes, there is quite a bit of exiling. Wizard class just came out in this past set. 1-drop enchantment that says when you play it, you have no maximum hand size. Pay 2 and a blue to level it up to 2, and you can draw 2 cards. Awesome. And then pay 4 and a blue at level 3. Whenever you draw a card, put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. You draw quite a bit of cards in this deck. So that could definitely benefit you in the long run. You do have to shell a little bit of mana into it, but honestly, it's one of the more economical of the classes. But yeah. All right. Here's your direct damage suite. These are the cards that are either going to be recurred through effects that have yet to come, or honestly just outright deal damage from the get-go. So we have Prophetic Bolt, 3 red, blue, deals 4 damage to any target. You can look at the top 4 cards of your library, put one of those cards in your hand, and then the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Combustible Gear Hulk, 4 and 2 red for a 6/6 construct with First Strike that says when it enters the battlefield, target opponent may have you draw 3 cards, and if they don't, you put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard, and then it deals damage to that player equal to the total CMC of all of those cards. So, I mean, if we just take this line of cards as what you would have drawn, you're dealing 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. You're dealing 11 damage to their face if they don't let you draw the cards. So, I really like this. I actually have this in my my Mael deck, my red, green, white deck, because I have a lot of big dudes that are large CMCs, and if they don't let me draw the cards, then it's just direct damage to their face. Honestly, the Gear Hulks are a great line. All of them are pretty dope. Bituminous Blast, 3 and red, black, and has Cascade. So when you cast the spell, you can then flip cards from the top of your deck until you find a card that is CMC less than the spell casted. So in this case, it would have to be 4 or less. And you get to play it without paying its mana cost. So if, say, Beacon Bolt was next, you deal the 4 damage from Bituminous Blast to target creature, and then this deals damage to target creature equal to the number of instants and sorcery cards you own in exile and in your graveyard. So, you're dealing God knows how much damage to a creature for however many spells you have in your graveyard or exile. And then this also has Jumpstart, which means you can cast this card from your graveyard by discarding a card in addition to paying the normal casting cost. And you exile it, but you get to cast it again, essentially. Risk Factor, 2 and a red. Target opponent may have Risk Factor deal 4 damage to them. If that player doesn't, you may draw 3 cards. And it also has Jumpstart. Breath of Malfagor, 3 black red for an instant that deals 5 damage to each opponent. You love to see it. Karvek the Merciless, 5 black red for a 5/4 human shaman that says whenever an opponent plays a spell, Karvek deals damage to target creature or player equal to that spell's CMC. Honestly, a really good card for the 99. Having him as a commander is possible, but the fact that he costs 7 is kind of steep for commander cost. But really good card, honestly, in this deck in general. Lava Axe, 5 for 5 damage to player or planeswalker. Decent card. Rift Bolt, 3 for a sorcery that deals 3 damage to target creature or player, or you can suspend it for 1. Rather than casting it for the 3, you can cast it for 1 red. It's exiled with a time counter on it, and then at the beginning of your upkeep, you remove the counter, and then when the last counter is removed, you play it. So then you cast it. Thunderous Wrath. 4 red red for an instant that has Miracle. You may cast this card for the Miracle cost if you draw it and it's the first card you drew this turn. So if you pull it off the deck, show it to people, pay the red, you can cast it for the 1. And it deals 5 damage to target creature or player. Gutter Snipe, a fellow goblin. Goblin Shaman. 2 and a red for a 2/2 Shaman, Goblin Shaman. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Gutter Snipe deals 2 damage to each opponent. And I just said, instants and sorceries are 1/4 of this deck. Alright, ways to compound your damage. So if we didn't have enough actual just outright damage, obviously Vile Smasher is in the direct damage area. But these are cards that compound that issue, or compound that damage. So Angrath's Marauders, 5 and 2 red for a 4/4 human pirate. If a source you control would deal damage to a permanent or a player, it deals double that damage to that permanent or player instead. Archfiend of Despair, 6 and 2 black for a 6/6 flying demon. Your opponents can't gain life. At the beginning of each instep, each opponent loses life equal to the life that player lost this turn. So, if you do damage, this amplifies it, or doubles the entirety of it. And the beauty of it here that these compound each other. So if you have Archfiend of Despair here at the beginning of each instep, and this is each instep, so this doesn't have to be your instep. This is every opponent's instep as well. If other people are doing damage to your opponents, and you have this lovely duo here, you are doing that damage again with Archfiend of Despair. And because it's Archfiend of Despair that's doing the damage, because you control it, you're doubling that damage as well. Because you control Archfiend of Despair. I believe that's how that works. We may need to rule check that, but that's how it works in my brain. Chandra's Incinerator, 5 and a red for a 6/6 elemental. That is nuts. Fair. Archfiend of Despair is nuts. Yep. And the fact that your opponents can't gain life, that may be illegal. That came out in 2018, looks like. I don't remember what set that is. I think they're against the law. But yeah, Chandra's Incinerator. This spell costs X less to cast, where X is the total amount of non-combat damage dealt to your opponents this turn. It has Trample. Whenever a source you control deals non-combat damage to an opponent, Chandra's Incinerator deals that much damage to target creature or planeswalker that player controls. So if you have all 3 of these guys on the field, you're also you're also killing probably one of their things as well. Technically, Angrath's Marauders does not do the damage. It just says that a source you control would do a damage. It just deals double. So it itself is not doing it. Otherwise, that would be 2 triggers or 2 instances. But, yeah. So just another doubling option. Fire Emancipation, 3 and 3 red for an enchantment. If a source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals triple that damage to that permanent or player instead. So, Same song, but triple verse. Um, yeah. Um, and then, yeah. So if a source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals triple that damage to that permanent or player instead. So it basically is the next tier up of Angrath's Marauders. Or, I mean, yeah, it is. Because this one specifically says non combat damage. Whereas this one is combat damage, is any damage. um, um, that's a good question. So I believe that you wouldn't get the double than the triple. I believe it would make it double, or it would make it whatever the highest is. So it would triple it. And then if Archfiend was on the field, you would triple the damage that was tripled at the end of the turn. Yeah. Because if they both are, if a source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player, it deals triple or double. The Fire Emancipation would override the Angrath's Marauders, um, and just make that source deal triple damage, because obviously it's already doing double. So the triple damage would just make it uh, that amount. And then at the end of the turn, technically whatever you tripled is then going to get tripled again because Archfiend is doing the damage. So you then tripled your triple. So yeah, that. And then rounding this section out, because this was the fun section, with Wound Reflection, 5 and a black for an enchantment that says at the end of each turn, each opponent loses life equal to the life he or she lost this turn. So it's basically Archfiend of Despair, but in the enchantment version. Archfiend of Despair is a Wound Reflection on a stick. And Fiery Emancipation, Angrath's Marauders is an almost Fiery Emancipation on a stick as well. So yeah, those are in the deck. So the beauty of these is it's any damage, whereas Chandra's Incinerators specifically non-combat damage. End of turn and instep. Um, Technically, no, they are the same. Um, this is Shadowmoor, so this is an older type card. So the wording is slightly different. These are newer, so they're going to say each instep as opposed to end of each turn. It's just because this is an out of date card, so the wording was updated later on. They are the same. They mean the same. All right. So now we're into the instant sorcery payoffs or bonus. Correct. Yes. If you had them both on the battlefield at the same time, they would do the same thing, so you would not have the stacking effect. Correct. Much like Angrath's Marauders and Fiery Emancipation don't stack. You just go with whatever the higher of the two is. All right, so instants and sorcery payoffs. Because, like I say, we've got a fourth of the deck that is instants and sorceries. How do we pay off this malarkey? On top of that malarkey. All right, so we have Charmbreaker Devils, which is a devil, 4/4/4/6. That says at the beginning of your upkeep, return an instant or sorcery card at random from your graveyard to your hand. And whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, Charmbreaker Devils gets +4/+0 until end of turn. Honestly, this is mainly in here for the first clause. Just the fact that you're recurring your sorceries in instances back to your hand and you're playing them repeatedly. Golden. Double Vision. 3 and 2 red. For whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell each turn, copy that spell, and you may choose new targets for the copy. So, we're just copying all the crap. Well, the first instant or sorcery each turn. So, if you're playing the sorcery on your turn, and you want to wait for the next turn and play an instance, then you can double that instant on their turn, and so on. So play the sorceries on your turn to get them copied. Play the instance on everybody else's turn to get them copied. And then Finale of Promise, I want it in here because it's literally a dragon in front of, I think possibly that's the sun, but it also looked kind of like a moon to me as well. So X and 2 red for a sorcery that says you may cast up to 1 target instant and or up to 1 target sorcery card from your graveyard, each with converted mana cost X or less without paying their mana costs. Double Vision seems busted. Lots of copying. Yep. If a card was cast this way, would be put into your graveyard this turn, exile it instead. If X is 10 or more, copy each of those spells twice. You may choose new targets for those copies. It's good. Just thinking about some of the stuff that you could do off of that with the instants and sorceries. Oh yeah. Be a lot of damage. Melek. Izzet Paragon. 4 blue-red for a 2/4 weird wizard. Because yes, weird is a creature type in Magic. Play with the top card of your library revealed. You may cast instants and sorceries from the top of your library. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell from your library, copy it. You may choose new targets for the copy. And if it's the first spell that you played that turn, you can copy it again. All the copies. If you have double vision on the field. All right. Octavia Living Thesis. 8 and 2 blue for an 8/8 elemental octopi. This spell costs 8 less to cast if you have 8 or more instants and or sorcery cards in your graveyard. She has Ward 8, which means to target her with any ability or spell, you have to pay 8 mana, whether that is you, the controller of her, or opponents. Usually it's more for the opponents, but technically it does affect you as well. And then, whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, target creature has base power toughness 8/8 until end of turn. So you can basically boost, any creature you've got. 4/4 becomes an 8/8. 6/6 becomes an 8/8, and it's just their base toughness and power. So it doesn't change them into an octopus. It doesn't modify their abilities. They keep their abilities. It just modifies their attack and toughness. Shark Typhoon. Been waiting for this one. So Shark Typhoon is an enchantment for a 5 and a blue. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell, which is artifact, enchantment, instant, or sorcery, or a planeswalker, but you don't have that in this deck, create an XX blue shark creature token with flying, where X is the spell's CMC. And you can also cycle this card. Why you would ever cycle this card, I don't know. Whoever cycles this card, I mean, I guess you're getting the blue sharks, but whatever. If you're cycling this card, then you're only getting what? You're getting, because the only reason you're cycling this card is because you can't play it. Or you, for whatever reason, desperately need blockers. But I can't do math and talk at the same time, apparently. 5, 4. So you're casting this for 4 sharks. So for 4/4 blue sharks with flying, but you only get 4 of them. Which I guess is nothing to sneeze at, and you get a card off of it. But and you said you wanted dragons. So here's another dragon. So honestly, Sprite Dragon's in here because it's a cheap blue-red flying haste dragon that literally gets bigger every time you cast a non-creature spell. And with how many you have in this deck, I mean, 9 enchantments, 13 artifacts. That's 22. 12 sorceries, 34. 12 instants, 46. Literally half the deck is a non-creature spell. So I liked it. It was cool. Looked cool. Art's cool. Gets in the deck. You also needed something on the bottom level so you can actually play stuff before getting to the big spells. Veyran, also cool art. Just came out of the Strixhaven set. 1 blue-red for a 2/2 Ifrit wizard with Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant sorcery spell, she gets +1/+1 until end of turn. And if you casting or copying an instant or sorcery spell causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Which means for both of these, they get +2/+2. This one stays on there. This one gets +2/+2. Till end of turn. So she becomes a 4/4. But honestly, I thought a pretty cool utility creature. Plus, again, great art. I like the fire and the water. Durgan. Rexial, the Risen Deep. 3 blue-blue-black for a Kraken that is a 5/8. Has Island Walk and Swamp Walk. Whenever Rexial, the Risen Deep, deals combat damage to a player, you may cast target instant or sorcery card from that player's graveyard without paying its mana cost. If that card would be put into a graveyard this turn, exile it instead. So this is another one of your payoffs for having the Urborg and giving swamps to everybody. Because if you give swamps to everybody, this creature is unblockable. Island Walk and Swamp Walk means that if the person you are attacking has either of those lands, it is unblockable. So, basically, you get free cards from their graveyard and force them to exile it. Plus, you get whatever, obviously, the card allows you to do. All right. Mnemonic Deluge. 6 blue for a sorcery. Exile target instant or sorcery card from a graveyard. Copy that card 3 times. You may cast the copies without paying their mana cost, and then exile Mnemonic Deluge. So this honestly could be anything. You have access to all if you're playing a normal commander game, all 4 graveyards of instants and sorceries, and you're literally playing that card 3 times without having to pay their mana cost. That mana cost. Now, granted, you're paying 9 for this card anyway, but at the very least, if that spell is, 3 or more CMC, you paid for it anyway. So yeah. All right, the removal suite. We have Bedevil, black, red, for destroy target artifact, creature, or planeswalker. We have Brinolin, which we've already gone over, basically being able to bounce all of the permanents for playing a spell that is 6 or greater. Chaos Warp, fitting in a Goblin deck. 2 in a red. The owner of target permanent shuffles it into their library and reveals the top card of their library. If it's a permanent, they can put it onto the battlefield. So this is kind of a random thing. This is removal in red without doing direct damage to it. So it's you throw something in, you might get something worse back out, but maybe you grab a land. You never know. Curse of the Swine. All right. So I did not realize that this card exiles the creatures. Very important. Because if it has indestructible, you're not destroying them. You are exiling them. So X and 2 blue. Pay however many target creatures you want to get exiled. And for each creature you exile this way, the controller gets a 2/2 green boar creature token onto the battlefield. So you can turn their demon, their angel, their archon, their... I don't know. Anything. Into a 2/2 green boar. Because you exiled it. Am fan. I forgot about that card. And I found it, and I'm like, yes. Cyclonic Rift is a 2-drop that says return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. Or if you overload it, if you pay the 6 and a blue, then you replace the target with each. So then it's return each non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. And if you're doing this with a fairly stocked board all the way around, you may cause people to have to discard cards because you return so many cards to their hand. Because that's non-land permanents. So that's artifacts, that's creatures, that's enchantments, that's planeswalkers. All of those get bounced to everybody's, except for yours, hand. So, good card. Usually is a staple in most blue decks. Damnation. 2 black. Destroy all creatures. They can't be regenerated. So this is just a board wipe when you need a board wipe. If you get to the point to where, for whatever reason, you are without any creatures on the battlefield, shoot off the sorcery, man. Wipe everybody's board. All right, and then we have the necessity, the imprisoned in the moon enchantment aura, for 2 and a blue. You can enchant a creature, a land, or a planeswalker. Enchanted permanent is a colorless land. With tap, add 1 colorless to your mana pool, and it loses all other card types and abilities. You can technically put this on your opponent's commander, and they become a land. Awesome. So one of the few ways to get rid of a commander when they, because you don't actually remove it from the battlefield. Because with commander rules, a lot of the times if you're exiling it or you're destroying it, they can just put it back into the command zone. This is one of the few ways to remove a commander for a good amount of time. Because if you turn them into something else, they stick on the field, but they're essentially useless. Vandal Blast. For 1 red, destroy target artifact you don't control. Overload. 4 and a red. Destroy each artifact you don't control. Yeah. Vraska's Contempt. Instant for 2 black. Exile target creature or planeswalker. You gain 2 life. And then we had 2 doubles in here. I had Clever Impersonator, which when it enters, it can copy any non-land permanent on the battlefield. So if you're desperate for mana, you can copy a mana rock. If your opponent has a big beefy bad guy and you want the big beefy bad guy, get the big beefy bad guy on your side as well. And then Glasspool Mimic is a 2 and a blue for a 0/0 shapeshifter rogue that when it enters as a copy of a creature you control, except that it's a shapeshifter rogue in addition to its other types. It also has a flip side where it can come in as a land as well. So if you're hurting for an island for a blue source, you could also play this card as a land if you wanted to, or had to, needed to. And then this is the Miscellaneous. So Wild Ricochet is a decent red spell. Instant 2 red. You may choose new targets for target instant or sorcery spell, then copy that spell. And then you can choose new targets for the copy. So if somebody is trying to Swords to Plowshares one of your instants or one of your permanents, you can then say, "Nay, good sir, I will remove one of your permanents, and I will remove one of their permanents," because you get to copy it, so it doubles it. Or if somebody's gaining life, and you don't want them to gain life. Or if somebody's, giving things death touch, you can say no. And then give your stuff death touch. So, Temporal Extortion was one that I found just looking through cards for this deck, and it had Phases of the Moon, and I'm like, art checks out, let's do it. So 4 black, I think it's one of the few black cards that allows you to take an extra turn. There were a few cards in this in several instances to where extra turns were an option, because blue is very, very centered around that, or does have that option. But when you play Temporal Extortion, any player may half his or her life rounded up. If a player does, you counter it. But if they don't, take an extra turn after this one. And that's the reason why this one survived, is you're literally doing half somebody else's damage, or half someone's life in damage, whether you get the extra turn or not. Does that let you redirect a spell that says gain 2 life because it doesn't say there is a target for it? So if the instant or sorcery spell that they are casting that says gain 2 life in your instance here, then that just says gain 2 life, yes, it would redirect that, because you're targeting the spell that they are casting, which says gain 2 life in this instance. So if you copy that spell, or sorry, if you target yourself for that spell rather than them, then you can copy it and target yourself again. So yes, you would redirect that spell to you and probably to you again for the copy, and then you would gain 4 life. So yes. Because, well, so the gain 2 life, it would say you gain 2 life in just Magic's vernacular. So if they played that, which was most likely a sorcery spell, something like that, then yes, you would be able to grab that and then change the you to you twice. Because you're targeting the spell, technically that spell would have to target, and it would be targeting the player that played the spell. And then here is your other mask option, Tiger. Mask of Avacyn. 2-drop artifact equipment mask. 3 equip cost. And equipped creature has +1/+2, and has hexproof. So basically can't be the target of spells or abilities that your opponents control. Of the 2 masks, it's probably the lesser of the 2. But the fact that it has hexproof, and we didn't have a Lightning Greaves in this deck. I didn't put any boots into it. This is kind of, I guess, Lightning Greaves option. And then we talked about Falthus, who is in here because Corndog has to be in here. And then Demon of Schemes, which is 3 and 3 black for a 5/5 demon, has flying. When it enters the battlefield, all other creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. And then whenever another creature dies, you get an energy. And then for 2 and a black, you can pay 4 energy and target creature card from a graveyard. Put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control tapped. Honestly, it was a good recursion. Like, you don't really have any recursion for creatures. You don't have that many delve cards. So you probably have a good amount of stuff in your graveyard if you want to target your own stuff. But this specifically says in a graveyard. So you can target anything in any player's graveyard with this. And with the way stuff dies and the fact that this is a 5/5, it coming in and -2/-2ing everything, you probably kill at least a couple things just outright. And with this deck to where you can literally target creatures with it, if this is on the field, you're just getting more energy. So I thought it was honestly a decent include, just to try and recur as well as get more advantage on your actual battlefield side. So after all that, that is the entirety of the deck minus, technically minus lands. But honestly, really, the land suite is kind of just my standard land suite for stuff, except for this one. This is one of the new lands where you can flip it, and it's either a mountain or an island. Reliquary Tower is also in here that gives you no maximum hand size. But those are bounce lands. These are the fetch lands. These are the check lands. For Commander, enters tapped unless you have 2 or more opponents. If you're playing a normal Commander game, you have 3. So honestly, a decent include in a Commander deck. Fabled Passage is one of the new lands that is basically a better Terramorphic Expanse, because if you have 4 or more lands, you can untap the land. It comes in untapped. But yeah, so the land suite is kind of just, and I put that on here because I didn't know. But over the entire deck, 28 of the cards that you're playing, non-land cards, are Brightland bounce triggers. So 28 of these cards are red outlined. So if you have Brightland on the field, Brightland technically includes itself. You have 27 other Evolving Wilds. Right, that's the other one. Um, um, but yeah, so honestly, it was a cool make it through early game. How many actual creatures do you have here? So you have a 3-drop, 2-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, 3-drop, 3-drop. You've got a nice, at least. I mean, you're one of your commanders is a 3-drop, so you're in a 4-man. If you're in a 4-man commander game, that's not necessarily difficult to do. But yeah, I mean, you trying to ramp as quickly as possible in these colors is difficult, but if you can do it, I feel like this would have a good evolved wilds. Ah, I see. Okay. Um, but yeah, make it through early game. I mean, that's a lot of blue stuff anyway. That's why a lot of blue is control-y. So it counters a lot of spells and stuff. Um, I think the Wild Ricochet is the only counter in the deck. I think I removed all of the other counters that were possible. A lot of the counters were fairly low in the way of cost. So I wanted some of the at least the beefier boys to have the option. And I feel like Nugget is not really a counter person. She's very much full steam ahead. Full steam ahead. Take the opposition out with a bang, rather than utilizing tactics or mental power or whatnot. So so yeah. So yeah, that is what I have called Vigilante Chaos. There is the curve. Honestly, a decent curve until you get to 6. But this is where you're actually getting the bounce triggers. 27, it said. So I may have miscounted. So there might be 27 rather than 28. But fairly close on mana symbols. Black is the lowest. We run 30 land, which is interesting. But I guess this one to technically be a land. I think there was another land in here too. And the fact that I had the artifacts and the suite that I had in there, probably why I went towards 30. I think honestly the decks that I looked up for this also had 30, which is why I leaned more towards that number. If we need to cut or something like that in that, if we ever get to that point, um, definitely can. It would just have to be something that we would run into eventually, and you know that's part of the commander deck's life. You modify the deck as you go along. But 9 enchantments, 12 sorceries, 15 artifacts. Oh, because it includes the artifact creatures as well. 12 instants, 24 creatures. So there's 13 down here. So it includes the other two. Well, the average approximate value is $656.66. 60 cents. Blah. According to this site, at least. So not the most expensive deck I have ever made. Honestly, it's cheaper than the majority of the decks that I play now. It beats out my land deck. Although I think this... No, it does have the Crucible of Worlds. Okay, you're just gonna proxy it? There you go. That'll work. Yeah, it's a little bit more than my land deck, and then about $10 more than my current cat deck. I haven't actually modified this to add the black yet, which is my game plan. But yeah, that is Vigilante Chaos.